Welcome, everyone. I heard someone say, has the meeting begun? I'm letting people arrive, but let me welcome you. My name is Julia Isaacs, and I welcome you to this webinar, Developing Research Questions to Get Answers for Policy and Practice. This webinar kicks off a new series for CCDF agencies and others who work on childcare research and policy. The title for the series, the overall series, is Building Your Data and Research Skills to Answer Policy Questions. Next slide. As a housekeeping matter, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the slides and the recording and the transcript online a few months after the webinar. Also, you'll notice that we have enabled closed captioning to make the webinar more accessible. So you can use that live transcript button at the bottom of your screen if you want to show or hide captions or adjust settings. We have about 150 people registered, and so all participants are muted. However, we do want to hear from you. And so please type your questions or comments into the chat box at any time. We'll have time for questions and a discussion with our panelists at the end of the webinar, but we'll pull up the questions that you make at any time. Next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Child Care Research and Evaluation Capacity Building Center, which is supported through the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, OPRE, in the Administration for Children and Families, and it's managed by a contract with the Urban Institute in partnership with Mathematica. I'm Julia Isaacs of the Urban Institute, and I serve as project director. In a few minutes, I'll be turning moderation over to Gretchen Kirby from Mathematica, who's co-principal investigator and is leading today's webinar. Someone asked where the slides will be posted. On this slide, I'll say in a minute, it'll be posted on our webpage as well as the OPRE webpage. And I should add that we're happy to see in the chat, and I forgot to invite you to put your name and where you're from in the chat if you enjoy doing so. Where was I? I wanted to acknowledge the support of Alicia Blandon, who is our OPRE project officer. And just tell you that the center, our goal is to assess and build the research and evaluation capacity of Child Care and Development Funds, CCDF lead agencies. And to learn more about us or to see our materials, including we will be posting materials from this webinar, you can go to our Building Child Care Research Capacity webpage. And Peter, if you can add that to the chat. Also, if you Google Building Childcare Research Capacity, I think you will find our webpage. So before I turn things over to Gretchen and this great panel we have for you, I want to start with a couple of polls to learn more about you. So Ivy, if you bring those up, we want to know if you are state or territory CCDF lead agency staff, tribal CCDF lead agency staff. I guess you can read this: technical assistance providers, external researchers, federal agency staff, or others. And if you scroll down after you answer that question, you'll see our second question is, we also want to know what areas of CCDF do you want to learn more about through research and evaluation? Subsidies, quality improvement or quality rating improvement systems, childcare research and referral, or all of the above. So please do fill out our polls. So I'm seeing that that 37% of you are with state or territory CCDF lead agency staff, 2% tribal, 12% TA providers, 20% external researchers, 7% federal agency staff, and 22% other. And all of the above, 63% want to hear about research on all of the above. We also see 20% on quality improvement rating and improvement systems, 15% subsidies, and 2% child care resource and referral. Okay, well, Gretchen, I hope that will be informative, as I think I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Julia. And hello, everyone. I'm Gretchen Kirby, and I'm so pleased to be serving as the facilitator for this event. Today, we are discussing developing research questions to get answers for policy and practice. When we started thinking about the content for this event, I was a little concerned it would seem sort of simple. Then I was in a meeting and someone brought up this quote from Einstein, and it struck me that getting the question right is really hard to do. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Now, we aren't going to do a research project in 5 minutes, but it's a powerful message to spend the time to figure out the right question to ask to solve your problem. As I was sort of looking around for some resources, I found a very brief article in Forbes from about 10 years ago that used this quote from Einstein and tells the story about the question that led to the cell phone. Why is it that when we want to call and talk to a person, we have to call a place? Peter's going to put the link to that article in the chat just for some quick fun reference. That article highlights some points that you're going to hear about today. Pause to consider your problem or issue. Think about the people and consider what would really make a difference. This all made me think that asking the right question is not just a step in a research study. It's a step toward being creative and innovative and getting answers and solving problems to make things better for people, which is what we all are trying to work for. So with this in mind, let me give you an overview of what we will cover today and the panelists who will be sharing information with you. We will begin with Heather Zaveri of Mathematica, who will talk about what's in a question by detailing the qualities of strong research questions and providing examples. She will also ask all of you to participate in identifying qualities of some research, some example research questions at the end of her presentation. Then we will hear from Catherine Kigera, who's with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education in the District of Columbia. And she will talk about the CCDF agency experience in developing research questions. Next, we will have a panel discussion with Heather, Catherine, and Tonya Williams, who is with the Arkansas Department of Human Services. And last, but importantly, we will address questions from you. But as Julia said, you don't need to wait until the end to ask your questions. Please post questions or comments in the chat box as they occur to you. Our panelists and myself will try to answer quick clarifying questions as they can in the chat, and other questions we will save for discussion at the end. Now I'd like to introduce Heather. Heather is a Senior Director in Human Services at Mathematica, leading the unit's Learning and Strategy Group. She oversees staff who specialize in providing technical assistance and support to strengthen human service programs. Heather has led many efforts that partner with federal and local organizations to improve their ability to conduct continuous quality improvement and use data and evidence for decision-making. So Heather, I will turn it to you.
Great, thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you all for having me on the webinar today. I'm really excited to be talking with everybody about what's in a question and offering some qualities to consider as you are developing research questions for your evaluations. Next slide. So I want to start by talking about key steps in the process for developing research questions. And you're going to see as you hear these steps in developing research questions, a really important point that I think underscores the quote Gretchen was talking about, but a really important point about taking the time to be intentional and thoughtful upfront when developing research questions, because this really allows you and supports you in developing and conducting high quality, productive, and effective research that will guide and improve your program moving forward. So when thinking about developing research questions, you can think almost about 4 parts of a process. And this includes taking that time to pause and reflect, to thinking carefully about what you want to know, thinking about identifying why you want to know it, and for whom knowing that information would be helpful. As you go through this reflection process, it can be really important to brainstorm a range of topics with a range of individuals. You want to include staff, partners, community members, or even families as you think about what topics are important and why would you want to know it. Sometimes this brainstorming process can really lead to more topics or more questions than you can answer, which can involve then needing to prioritize which questions you can answer. To do this, you can think about urgency or the value that that question would offer in terms of informing your program improvement and decision making. Then, as you go through that prioritization process, you also will want to be assessing the strength of questions. And you can assess the strength of questions based on a set of qualities that I'm going to talk about throughout the rest of my presentation. Now, I do want to say that as you develop research questions, it's very rare that research questions are something we develop once and never revisit. And so it is kind of an iterative process and one that where you want to be working to improve and refine questions as you go. So you might be asking, next slide, please. You might be asking yourself right now, why this focus on research questions? Well, a strong research question is really the first and a connecting piece in high quality research. A strong research question helps to connect the purpose of your research to the information and methods, and it puts people at the center of it all. You need to think about all of these pieces to feed into your question development. And as you put these pieces together, it will allow you to develop questions that will produce answers to inform policy and practice. So developing a strong research question is an important first step in conducting high quality research and evaluation. So let's first review some of the features of high quality research and evaluation, since these pieces are really intertwined and rely on one another. And as we talk about questions, we'll talk about how they're all connected. So as you think about high quality research and evaluation, you want to be thinking about the purpose of your research. And when you're thinking about purpose, it's really kind of that big picture statement or idea of what you are trying to do or accomplish. That purpose really helps to then inform your research question. Your research question is what specifically you're looking to answer through the research. As you identify your question, you really want to be articulating for yourself why this is a key question for your program at this point in time. Also, as you think about your research question, you want to be thinking about the methods you're going to be using to answer that question. Asking yourself if the methods that are available to you, are they appropriate for answering the question at hand? You do want to make sure there's alignment between the research question you're asking and the methods you have accessible to answer the question. And then related to methods is your information. And this is really the accessible information that you have on hand or that you can gather to help answer that research question. And so it's all four of these that really fit together when you're conducting high quality research. And at the start, it's good to think about these even at a high level because they all just kind of reinforce each other. This process can be an iterative process where you develop your research questions, you consider what it means for how you will answer it, you think about your data collection capacity, and then you circle back to see if all the pieces align. If you find they don't align, well, that's a place where you want to revise and then kind of revise and think about it and keep assessing till you have alignment between the purpose, the question, the methods, and the information. So next, I want to talk about qualities of strong research questions connected to these features. And as I do that, we'll share lots of examples to really illustrate how this goes. Next slide. So a key to developing a strong research question is to ensure it clearly connects to and articulates the purpose of the research you're conducting. Strong research questions, to do this, strong research questions will represent kind of three qualities, which are the questions relevant, useful, and focused. What we mean by this is when it comes to questions being relevant, is that questions should address a topic that is of interest for your program to best serve children and families. Each of your programs operates in contexts that are unique. And so the questions you're asking in your research should be tied to the situation in your program, what you want to know at this point in time, or what you think your partners and others in the community might be most interested in knowing. In terms of the quality of usefulness, this really means that the answers to a question can point to some actionable steps that will support decision-making and improvements for your program. The answers to the question would help the children's families and providers served by your program. And then finally, equality is focused. And this really means that each question being asked should focus on a single topic or problem. You want each question to be targeted so that you're not trying to do too much with one single question. So developing research questions, next slide please. Developing research questions begins with the purpose. So this helps you to ensure that your question meets those three qualities of being relevant, useful to answer, and focused on a single topic. So when you think about the purpose, you're not thinking about your research question. You're thinking about that more big picture, what you're trying to address through your overall research and evaluation. And this is really, so your purpose is really that big picture need for information that starts or kicks off your process for developing a research question. On this slide, we show topics and examples for each topic of how your purpose could be tied and start to kick off that process of identifying research questions. So for example, if the purpose of your research is to seek or assess solutions to problems, you might start with a big picture question around how might we attract and support a qualified workforce. If your purpose is to explore assumptions about the need for or provision of services, you might be interested in looking at how might we understand the unmet demand for childcare for infants and toddlers in our community. If you are looking to explore or test a change in implementation or a policy, you might want to look specifically at how might you increase subsidies to help families access childcare. Or say you want to spark innovation, you want to try something new, you want to identify new strategies. Here you might be thinking about something like how might we get information to families to help them access and use subsidies. So you can see from this that identifying your purpose really lays the foundation for helping you get to strong research questions. And with your purpose in mind, you can move on to developing research questions based on the qualities we have talked about so far of whether your question is relevant, useful, and focused. So now let's turn to some examples of research questions built from a clearly stated purpose. So on this slide, we're going to start with one of the purposes talked about on the prior slide. So say your purpose of your research that you're conducting is you want to look at how might we get information to families to help them access and use subsidies. And now you're ready to start building your research question. So now the slide's going to show a couple of example questions, and we're going to evaluate each question for whether the question is meeting the qualities talked about so far. So the first example question is what are the ways to get information to families to help them access and use subsidies? I'm going to think, what qualities do I see in this question? Well, I think this question is relevant. It's useful because answers to this question can point to specific strategies about the type of information families might want or need. This example asks about the family experience. I just jumped ahead. And so intended to help meet the needs of the family. But this question is broad. It's hard to know what information to collect. This question, when I look at it, it's actually framed almost more like a brainstorming and not a research question. So I wouldn't think this is a super strong question. So let's go to the second example. This